Well, we've been watching Air Canada stock today after the company pulled its forecasts for the rest of the year as we continue to wait to see what happens next in the flight attendant strike. I want to bring back Robert Kokonis, the airline expert who's been tracking the story, joined us last week. He's president of AirTrav. Nice to have you back with us, Robert. Just based on where we sit today, what is your current assessment of the situation?
Boy, it sure isn't great because we have a union and its members that are defying a lawful order by the minister under Section 107 of the Canada Labour Act, which is ordering the workers back to work. And by the way, there can be some significant fines that could hit the union up to and including also decertification. Don't think it would go that far. And even flight attendants themselves could face fines and disciplinary action up to and including a dismissal. So we're in a really tough time right now. But you know who's in a tough time? The 500,000 or so passengers we estimate have been impacted by this action so far.
I had seen Air Canada make reference to a similar number for affected travelers so far. One of the union representatives in a report that we aired earlier highlighting that, in their words, Air Canada was, basically standing by to wait for the federal government to jump in here. We've had a number of examples across a number of sectors over the last couple of years where we've seen the feds take action to get people back to work. So how has sort of the playbook used in strike situations over the last couple of years, do you think, influenced the way the flight attendants were sort of ready to react this time around?
I certainly have heard those discussions quite often about how some companies wait for the government to step in. But I don't fully subscribe to that because the reputational damage, not to mention the financial damage a company like Air Canada takes, you're just looking at the stock a few minutes ago, is quite significant. And I really don't believe that's the case. What I think we need to do, because we've seen a number of these, haven't we, John, the past couple of years, airlines either close to going out or strike. Look at if a CPAC or a federal union goes on strike like they did, what are we facing? Maybe some delays in getting a passport, a few other minor inconveniences. But this type of strike is not only causing massive economic impact to the country, but it's shutting a lot of things down and stranding passengers globally. So it's a huge, huge impact. I think we've got to look, the federal government, I opined about this before, have got to look to the U.S., to the U.S. Railway Labor Act. And what that does in short, it's a complex, it's a multi-stage process with clear rules of engagement, all designed to ensure all the parties are first and foremost negotiating in good faith. But the whole objective is to avoid strikes and lockouts, which is look at the U.S. marketplace, airline market. How often do you see an airline strike or almost strike down there? Like it's rare, if ever. So I think we've got to go, after this is over, we got to go back and take a look at this because it's just simply not acceptable, the status quo.
The Prime Minister told reporters in Ottawa today he found the situation disappointing. The union had been very clear they did not want the government to step in directly, specifically calling out the PM. How do you see this as a challenge for him still early in his role as the Prime Minister?
Well, I agree. It is a challenge, and it depends which side of the political spectrum you're on. Like, who's the friend of organized labor or the common woman and man on the street? But look at both the previous Liberal governments and even the Conservative government way back in, I think, 2012 or 13 made use of 107. So in a way, I would agree it's maybe too easy to get there, which is why I'm suggesting we need to make an overhaul to the Canada Labour Act, and again, looking at elements that the U.S. are able to use there. The challenge, of course, in all of this, as you and I both know, having talked about airlines so many times, is it's a high fixed capital industry, big investments. The amount of profit airlines make, if I take Air Canada's in a good year after-tax profit and divide it by the number of passengers, I'm lucky if I get to around $7 a head. So it's a very, very thin profit margin. And so as a result, and with a very volatile input called fuel, So airlines globally look towards labor as a thing they can ensure they've got a competitive cost formula. So the fact that the company has come back, and I'm not taking either side per se, but I've seen airline agreements globally. The fact the airline's got an all-in offer on the table of about 38%, including, I was at Air Canada and also looking at them when there was the big changeover from defined benefit to defined contribution, and there's still elements of defined benefit with the flight attendants. So I don't know, we're heading into we're in this period of uncertainty in the airline sector because of global tariff wars, and I think now is the time for the association to settle. There's good numbers on the table. There has been a movement, I believe, to recognize more of this ground, this quote unquote unpaid ground time, and I think that the association's got to look at that very, very carefully. You have to be careful what you want, right? Because the minister's ordering binding arbitration here, but the parties are still able to settle on their own if they can get back to the table.
And where do you think the winds have blown in the court of public opinion? And I would include in that the stranded passengers who, inevitably would, and naturally point the finger at somebody. Are they pointing it at, flight attendants, or are they pointing at the airline?
Well, I do a couple of social channels, as you know, right? But I try not to delve too deeply into the postings because everyone hates, name the airline, right? And everybody hates it. Name the telco, everybody hates it. So in this case, obviously, Air Canada suffers not just from the standpoint financially, but of course in the court of public opinion. I likened last week this to it may have been yourself, but I mean, buying travel is kind of like buying a commodity, sugar, milk, eggs, and every airline's got its own ability to dress up their offering through loyalty programs and other aspects. Of course, Air Canada is a go everywhere global carrier. And I believe that once there is a settlement, people will come back. I think, though, in this case, because we have had this go beyond just a threat of a strike to a strike and then define a back to work order, I think that, unfortunately, Porter and, well, good for them, Porter and WestJet and Flair and Transat will stand to pick up some incremental business that'll be sustained and not just a one-off. I had to go back on WestJet because Air Canada was on a strike. So that's also the risk that the flight attendants take. And also, I would note, if the settlement gets too out of hand, the markets in the street understand, they watch this stuff. As I mentioned before, second quarter labor costs were up. The pilots deal from last year is rippling through Air Canada's OPEX. And at the end of the day, we, the passengers, have got to pay the freight through our ticket prices, and you got to make sure that that's back to the airline gold standard. You have to have a competitive revenue line to make it work. So if ticket prices have to be adjusted too much, then that's the challenge, of course. But let's hope that cooler heads prevail and QP understands.
And we're basically out of time, but I did want to let our audience know Air Canada's CEO, Michael Rousseau, is scheduled to be joining us here on Trading Day just after 1 o'clock Eastern. So, Robert, just out of curiosity, what would you ask the CEO of Air Canada?
What I would ask him is there anything more it would take for the company to get a deal? And again, none of us are privy to the detailed confidential discourse between the sides, but is there anything that he could foresee without divulging a specific number that he thinks it could take to get the company, or the association and its members across the line? And also as well, I mean, does he believe that the members will heed the warnings from the CARB and get back to work, because there's some pretty serious consequences if they don't, John.
Okay. Really appreciate the breakdown, as always. Thanks very much for sharing some perspective. Robert Kokonis joining us from AirTrav.